Well, it kind of feels like it's been a month since we were last here together last week. It's been a roller coaster of hope and optimism, of dread and shock and tears and anger and incredulity and maybe a flickering light of hope. But let's remember that every day we wake up to a new day and we get to choose between love and fear. Every day there are things to fear and there are people and things to love. This week, our country chose fear, but that doesn't mean we have to. Every day, we can still choose love. So I'm grateful to be celebrating a new life in our community today, for this is one way that we choose love over fear when we express our commitment to the next generation. Now, as humans, we chart our activities on calendars by the day, the week, the month, the year, but we also live our lives in stages, acknowledging milestones, recognizing that there are thresholds that we walk through as we enter new phases of life. So this morning, we're celebrating one of those threshold moments in a particular family and for this congregation. We're dedicating a child. So this is a celebration of this cycle of life, this ritual act that was established millennia before us. It's a recognition of the gift of life, and for this particular life, this child who is getting started on his wonderful journey. So just to be clear, this is not a baptism. It's more like that dedication that we read about in Jesus' story that comes right after Christmas, where we're told the time came for their purification according to the laws of Moses, and Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. For here they were promising to raise the child within the community of their faith, in the ways of their faith. Now, Jesus' baptism took faith when he was about 30. So his baptism marks a different milestone in life. That was a moment of decision when he was committing his life to following God wherever that would lead. So there are two different threshold moments in very different stages of life. Now, at some point in history, the church took those two and they became conflated. They were melded together as one. For the earliest church understood baptism as a symbol of a decision to follow Jesus, a decision made by an individual or sometimes by a family. It would continue to guide their understanding of God and their way of life. But as the centuries went by and the church gained political power, it was believed that humans were born sinful, and only the church had the power to give or withhold God's grace and forgiveness and acceptance. Now, if that were true, you wouldn't want a child to die without having received that assurance of their place with God in the afterlife. So that first child dedication into the family of God became a baptism of forgiveness. But gradually, with the Protestant Reformation going along, more and more individuals and congregations could read the scriptures for themselves and begin to see that God's love is broader than the confines of any official church system. And children are not tainted with original sin. Not to worry, they learn from their elders how to mess up their lives. We've got that down. But children are not in danger of eternal condemnation. For the God that Jesus teaches us about is always drawing us into the way of love. And when we are old enough to begin to understand the consequences of our actions and can desire to follow the way of Jesus, we get to choose the path we want to take in life, and then we are invited to share that choice, that life decision, through baptism. At the beginning of a child's life, this act of dedicating an infant or a young child to God happens within community. And really, a baby dedication isn't even mostly about the baby. It's really about the parents and the extended family and the church family that promises to be family, sharing the responsibilities of raising this child to know that he is loved by God and by a whole bunch of other people. This is really how we come to know we are loved by God. Because we know that children learn by a kind of osmosis. They observe and they absorb the passions and the emotions of the people around them. And there is that passage that we heard this morning from Deuteronomy where Moses is challenging the Israelites to pass on God's ways to the next generation. Hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments I give you today to be on your hearts. He's saying before you can pass on your faith to your children, you have to live it yourself. It has to be in your heart. And you have to be an example, for they will absorb what they observe. So the commitment we made today in dedicating a child to God is not just to teach him what we believe about God, but this family and this congregation is making a commitment to love each other and everyone else with that kind of love that we have learned from observing Jesus. Sharing the grace we have received from God and the encouragement that we experience within this community of faith. And then this child will feel our passion. This child will experience being a beloved child of God. Through the experiences, he will become a compassionate and loving person. This is our hope. This is our commitment. So as I said at the beginning, I am glad we are dedicating this new life to God this week as we process our feelings about all that has happened the past week, as we prepare for the struggle that lies ahead. For many in our community, many of you here, the world feels like a more dangerous place this week. LGBTQ plus freedoms and supports that have been gained over time feel threatened again. The people who have absorbed racial prejudice from their communities throughout their childhoods have now been emboldened to harass those they consider less valuable. Immigrants, both documented and undocumented, fear for their safety just a little more this week, and women fear for their health a little more. But what history teaches us is that whenever progress in human rights is made, a backlash can be expected. So I'm also grateful this week for Leslie Garrett, who's been leading us through Martin Luther King's process of nonviolent resistance over the last month, because we didn't know how much we were going to need it. Last week, we talked together about what a long, slow process it was just to see small successes in the civil rights movement. And Bishop William Barber Jr., the leader of the Poor People's Movement, reminds us that 60 years after America's attempt at Reconstruction in the 1920s, a majority of Americans continued to embrace white supremacy. So he says if we find ourselves in a similar place 60 years after the expansion of voting rights that came in the 1960s and 70s, we cannot be surprised. But neither can we think that this is all that America is or can be, for we all have within us the potential for both evil and good. We have potential to choose love over fear. And we know that we are not alone as Americans in our country. The struggle for justice continues in fits and starts throughout the world. So I want to share the words of our friend Malkaz Sangulashvili, who is the bishop of the Peace Cathedral in Tbilisi in the country of Georgia. We've had a connection with this church since 1946, when the pastor here, Dr. Louis Newton, traveled to Russia and to Tbilisi in a mission of peace after World War II. And Colin and Colleen visited him in Tbilisi in 2019, and he came and visited with us in 2020. Now, Malkaz sent this letter to our alliance churches just a few weeks before our election, writing about our common concerns and our common commitments. So he writes, throughout history, the Peace Cathedral has repeatedly taken bold stance in defense of oppressed minorities, even while enduring periodic harassment from religious extremists. Our community serves a unique spiritual refuge for Christians, Jews, Muslims, the LGBTQ community, refugees from the Ukraine, as well as Russians fleeing the war. When faced with the ugliness of homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or xenophobia, the Peace Cathedral answers with initiatives that reflect beauty, love, and inclusiveness. Like you, the Peace Cathedral must confront the ugliness of hatred and irrational fears and prejudice and bigotry of certain situations and institutions. We stand against religious hypocrisy and discrimination of people made in the image of God based on their gender, sexuality, religious beliefs, race, or ethnicity. He continues to encourage us. I understand how difficult it is to be in the position of a minority, but over time we have learned that being a minority can offer advantages larger entities do not have. The bigotry of our time will fade, but in the meantime, it is our sacred duty and honor to engage in the struggle for God's unconditional love, reverence, and inclusion, not only for our fellow human beings, but for all of creation and animals, birds, flowers, brother, sun, and sister moon, and Mother Earth. So be strong, be encouraged, and be courageous in your love for justice and freedom, and do not grow weary of doing what gives life its true meaning. Pity those who stand against justice, but never harbor any resentment towards them. For they are prodigal children who in time may find their way back home. Injustice has already been conquered and defeated by the resurrection, for we are people of the resurrection. So thank you to our friend, Bishop Marquez, for sending us these words of encouragement right when they are most needed. We are not alone. The challenge for justice is taking place around the world. Together, here as this community, in the communities that we all belong to, in our country, with our partners around the world, we can take heart with the words that the psalmist that was read this morning. Do not put your trust in princes and mortals in whom there is no help. For their breath departs and they return to the earth, and on that day their plans perish. But happy are those whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them. God who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous and watches over the strangers, upholds the orphan and the widow. This is the God that we know. This is the God that we follow. This is the God and all that we will teach our children by our example. This is what we seek to do each day, choosing love over fear together. And now let's continue to celebrate this gift of life and love in song.